Did you know that the F-111 Aardvark's complex variable sweep wing design was initially considered a total disaster? During its combat debut in 1968, Operation Combat Lancer, three of the first six aircraft deployed were lost to technical failures and structural fatigue. These catastrophic losses immediately raised serious questions. Was it worth investing in such an expensive and complex aircraft that proved so unreliable in combat? The F-111 program cost a staggering 6.5 billion USD in 1970s dollars. The American press dubbed it the flying coffin and grilled Congress over what seemed to be wasteful and pointless spending. However, after being grounded for critical fixes, the F-111 returned deadlier than ever, boasting an incredible mission completion rate of over 90%. The Flying Coffin's outstanding performance in Vietnam, Libya, and the Persian Gulf ultimately vindicated its once controversial design. Its bold variable sweep wing became an accepted feature for high-performance aircraft, and its high-speed terrain-hugging capability earned it the title of the world's best low-level strike aircraft. But now the F-111 is retired, so what aircraft took its place? If you know, drop a comment below. Speaking of the Aardvark service with the US Air Force in Vietnam, perhaps the most harrowing campaign it participated in was Operation Linebacker II. It was a campaign feared by both sides. American crews feared the formidable North Vietnamese air defenses, while North Vietnamese soldiers dreaded the swing-wing bandits that would swoop in unannounced in the dead of night, delivering their deadly payloads with pinpoint accuracy. But for the Vietnamese people, the fear of losing their country and their independence was likely greater. Perhaps that's why their anti-aircraft fire was all the more ferocious. This ferocity led one veteran F-111 pilot from the campaign to joke that if he'd been just a little more superstitious, he might not have flown his missions. He pointed out that all the F-111s lost up to that point had tail numbers ending in 3G, and they had all gone down on a Monday night. By the winter of 1972, the war in Vietnam felt like it was teetering on the edge of an ending. The Paris peace talks had dragged on for months, papers drafted, agreements nearly ready, but North Vietnam was holding back on signing. In Washington, Richard Nixon decided he wasn't going to wait any longer. If diplomacy had stalled, then pressure, hard, unmistakable pressure, would have to finish the job. And so the plan for Operation Linebacker II took shape, the largest, most concentrated strategic bombing campaign ever flown over North Vietnam. The spotlight would naturally fall on the B-52s, those vast 8-engine bombers that symbolized American air power. They were going to go where they had never gone before, right into the skies over Hanoi and Haiphong, two of the most heavily defended cities in the world. For years, they had been spared such treatment out of fear of the losses they might take. Now Nixon was sending them in night after night. But not every part of this campaign played out in the stratosphere. Down closer to the treetops in the darkness where hills and rivers cut the land into shadowed mazes, another aircraft was running its own war, the General Dynamics F-111. With its sharp drooping nose and wings that could sweep back or swing forward mid-flight, the Aardvark looked like nothing else in the theater. And in the coming nights, it would prove why that strange design mattered. The first wave hit just after dark. 129 B-52s thundered in from Guam and Thailand, flanked by more than 100 fighters and support aircraft. Somewhere in that mix, the F-111 crews had their own assignments, low-level strikes on radar stations, surface-to-air, missile batteries, and other defenses that could rip into the bomber formations. With their wings swept forward, the F-111s flew in tight to the ground, the terrain following radar, skimming them over ridges and down into valleys almost invisible to the enemy's big search radars. That night, the North Vietnamese brought down 3 B-52s, a gut punch to the Air Force. But the F-111s, they came home intact. Their job wasn't glamorous, they didn't level city blocks, but by knocking out radars and missile sites, they made survival a little more likely for everyone else. The next 2 nights kept up the tempo, more than 90 B-52 sorties each, and more losses, 3 bombers a night. It became painfully clear that the big bombers were flying predictable patterns at the same altitudes along the same tracks. North Vietnam's SA-2 missile crews could set their watches by it. For the F-111s, those nights were a test of nerves. Flying low in the dark was always risky, but now their missions took on a sharper edge. Find the radars, kill them fast, and get out before the missiles started hunting. That variable sweep wing was their edge, swept back over the Gulf for the sprint and then rolled forward over the jungle to keep them steady at the slower speeds needed for precision attack. The crews would feel the air grow heavy and warm as they dropped under the cloud deck, the jets ride, smoothing as the wings spread wide. By the third night, the Air Force knew it had to change its game. They broke up. The bomber streams came in at different heights and from multiple directions, while weasels went in to bait enemy radars. And now the F-111s were tasked more deliberately hit the airfields before MiGs could launch smash missile depots, before the batteries could reload, burn out the radar dishes before they could track anything. This was their element. The Aardvark could scream in at near Mach speeds with wings tied to the fuselage, then drop to treetop level, and swing them out flying stable and level as the weapons officer lined up the drop. Bombs away, wings back, and the jet was gone before the defenders knew what hit them. That night only 2 B-52s went down, still losses but a clear improvement. On Christmas Eve, Nixon called a 36-hour halt, a chance for Hanoi to signal they were ready to sign. For F-111 crews, it meant a rare night without skimming blacked-out hills at 600 miles per hour. Some used it to breathe, some to fix the inevitable wear on machines that were being pushed to their limits every night. No reply came from the north. They called it the largest single night of bombing in the war. 120 B-52s plus hundreds of fighters, tankers, and support aircraft hitting 10 targets in and around Hanoi and Haiphong. For the F-111s, this was a gauntlet. The defenses were still fierce, and their role was as dangerous as ever, opening paths through radar and missile coverage so the big birds could unload without walking straight into a kill zone. That night, you could almost feel the shift in the cockpit when the wings came forward for the low-level run. The jets steadied, the instruments glowed, and the radar in the nose hummed as it traced the land ahead. The bombs went down on time, and the crews yanked the wings back, climbing hard and fast into the safety of speed. 2 B-52s were lost that night, but without the F-111s punching holes in the defenses, it could have been far worse. The last 3 nights were a relentless tightening of the noose. Bridges were cratered, power plants smashed, supply lines severed. The F-111s kept up their silent work, knocking out whatever eyes and claws the enemy still had. By the night of the 29th, Hanoi signaled they would return to the table. In just 11 days, the US had flown 729 B-52 sorties and dropped more than 20,000 tons of bombs. 15 B-52s were lost along with scores of smaller aircraft. Civilian casualties were heavy and the campaign would be debated for decades. But militarily, the pressure worked. The Paris Peace Accords were signed on January 27, 1973. For the F-111 Linebacker II was more than a mission, it was redemption. 4 years earlier, the jet had stumbled into combat and limped away with a tarnished reputation. Now it had flown hundreds of low-level strikes into the most dangerous airspace on Earth and come back with losses that could be counted on one hand. It had proved the worth of its strange, expensive, much-mocked design. The swing wing wasn't just a clever trick of engineering, it was the reason the F-111 could live in 2 worlds, the high-speed dash and the low-speed crawl, the altitude where you run and the altitude where you hide. In Linebacker II, that meant getting in under the radar, hitting the target dead on, and getting out before anyone could put a missile in the air. Looking back, those who flew it will tell you the Aardvark wasn't perfect, no airplane ever is, but in those December nights, it was exactly the machine the job required. In a conflict where many weapons failed to deliver on their promises, the F-111 proved it could do exactly what it was designed to do. We'll continue with the F-111 Aardvark and the daring attack on Libya in 1986. On the evening of April 14, 1986, the quiet of RAF Lakenheath in England was broken by the thunderous roar of afterburners. Under the cover of darkness, F-111 Aardvark strike aircraft of the 48th Tactical Fighter Wing flew into the sky, their sleek dart-like shapes pointing south. Their destination was North Africa. Their mission, one of the most audacious and politically charged of the Cold War, was to strike at the heart of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi's regime in Libya. The mission, codenamed Operation El Dorado Canyon, was America's forceful response to a series of state-sponsored terrorist attacks culminating in the bombing of a Berlin discotheque popular with U.S. servicemen. President Ronald Reagan's administration was determined to send an unequivocal message that sponsoring terror would have severe consequences. The plan was as complex as it was bold to simultaneously neutralize 5 key targets linked to Libya's terrorist infrastructure. As Colonel Paul Fazikreli, a pilot with the 48th Wing, explained, the strategic planners faced a critical choice. The U.S. Navy, with its powerful aircraft carrier stationed in the Mediterranean, was perfectly capable of projecting power. Their A-6 Intruder aircraft were proven workhorses designed for just such a task. However, the nature of the targets in and around the capital city of Tripoli presented a unique and formidable challenge. While the Navy was tasked with hitting 2 airfields to the east, the Air Force was assigned the 3 most heavily defended and politically sensitive targets in the west clustered around Tripoli. These were not simple military installations. They included Gaddafi's command and control headquarters at the Bab al-Azizia compound, a naval academy at Sidi Bilal that doubled as a training center for underwater demolition teams, and the military apron at Tripoli International Airport, which was used to ferry terrorists and their supplies aboard IL-76 transport planes. The Tripoli area was a hornet's nest of Soviet-supplied air defenses. A dense network of surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft artillery guarded the capital, ready to unleash a wall of steel against any intruder. In this environment, the Navy's A-6, while capable, was considered at a disadvantage. It was a subsonic aircraft that flew slightly higher and was more vulnerable to the dense curtain of fire it would have to penetrate. To succeed, an A-6 strike would have required an enormous support package of electronic warfare and suppression aircraft, increasing the mission's complexity and risk. It was here at the 11th hour that the unique capabilities of the F-111 Aardvark became the deciding factor. The F-111 was built for one thing above all else: high-speed, low-altitude penetration. Its defining feature was its revolutionary variable sweep wing, allowing it to take off with wings spread wide for maximum lift and then sweep them back to become a streamlined spear capable of supersonic speeds just a few hundred feet above the ground. More importantly, it was equipped with a groundbreaking terrain-following radar. This remarkable piece of technology allowed the aircraft to automatically hug the contours of the Earth, flying at breathtaking speeds in total darkness or bad weather, staying below the enemy's radar coverage. For the pilots in the cockpit, it was a gut-wrenching roller coaster ride. For the enemy on the ground, the F-111 was a phantom unseen and unheard until the moment its bomb struck. It was decided that the F-111, with its ability to get in fast strike with precision and survive, was the best tool for the most dangerous job. The mission would be a joint effort, a textbook example of the Air Force and Navy working in concert, with each service playing to its strengths. But the plan's brilliance was matched only by its incredible difficulty. A major geopolitical hurdle emerged when France and Spain, fearing reprisal, denied the United States overflight rights. This forced the Lakenheath-based F-111s into an epic, circuitous journey. Instead of a direct flight over France, they had to fly west out over the Atlantic, down the coast of Portugal, through the narrow Strait of Gibraltar, and then eastward across the full length of the Mediterranean, a round trip of over 6,400 miles. The flight would take more than 14 hours. This was an unprecedented endurance test for an aircraft that, as Colonel Fazikreli noted, was typically a 2.5-hour mission airplane. To push these aging airframes for 6 or 7 hours before they even faced the stress of combat was, in his words, really gutsy. The crews were pushed to their limits, strapped into a cramped cockpit for longer than any fighter mission in history. The journey required a delicate high-stakes ballet of multiple in-flight refuelings from KC-10 and KC-135 tankers, a process demanding immense concentration, especially in the dark over a churning sea. As one pilot dryly commented, with the adrenaline of the coming fight, there was no problem staying awake. The strain on the machines was immense and predictable. Of the 24 F-111s that took off from England, several had to turn back due to mechanical failures. By the time the strike force reached the drop-off point near Italy, only 18 remained. Of those, only 11 would ultimately press on to deliver their ordnance on the targets in Tripoli. This attrition wasn't a sign of failure, but a stark testament to the mission's extreme demands. As the F-111 screamed toward the Libyan coast at just 200 feet, the sky erupted. The night, once black, was suddenly torn apart by a blizzard of tracer fire and the blinding, disorienting bloom of parachute flares. The flares were the thing that was most disheartening, Fazakerley recalled, as they would temporarily rob the pilots of their night vision and create a distracting, chaotic light show. But inside the cockpit, the technology worked its magic. The terrain-following radar kept them safely pinned to the surface, while the weapons systems officer in the right seat focused on the ghostly green and black image from the PAVTAC pod. This advanced system, which rotated out from the aircraft's weapons bay, contained both a forward-looking infrared camera and a laser designator. It allowed the crew to see their target clearly in the dark and guide their laser-guided bombs with pinpoint accuracy. The attack on the Bab al-Azizia headquarters was a masterclass in precision. The F-111 executed a toss-bombing maneuver, pulling up slightly to loft the bombs toward the target before banking sharply away to escape the blast. As the plane turned, the PAVTAC pod kept its laser beam fixed on the aim point. The video footage from the attack is stunning. The crosshairs are locked squarely on the headquarters building, not as many believed on Gaddafi's nearby tent. In the final 8 seconds of the bomb's flight, the laser painted the target and the munitions followed the beam, down, landing directly at the front door and skipping inside before detonating. The next day, news footage showed the building completely gutted. At the Tripoli airfield, another F-111 executed its attack run, dropping a string of 12 bombs across the military ramp. The weapons scattered in a calculated pattern designed to inflict maximum damage on the parked IL-76 transport aircraft. After the brief violent moments over the targets, the F-111s egressed out over the Gulf of Sidra, where Navy fighters provided a protective escort for the long, weary journey home. In the aftermath, the mission drew both praise and criticism. Not every aircraft hit its target. Some had to abort due to equipment malfunctions or the strict rules of engagement designed to prevent civilian casualties. Critics pointed to the lost aircraft and the aborted runs as evidence of a flawed mission. But for the planners and the pilots, the operation achieved exactly what it set out to do. The goal was to inflict visible damage on 3 targets tied to terrorism activities. With clear video evidence of 2 targets being destroyed and a third showing water draining from the damaged commando training pool. The mission was, by its own metrics, an undeniable success. Moreover, Operation El Dorado Canyon was the next moment to vindicate the F-111 after the fierce Vietnam battlefield. The aircraft, born from Robert McNamara's controversial vision of a joint fighter-bomber the plane once derided as a flying coffin, after its troubled debut in Vietnam, had proven its worth in the most demanding of circumstances. It had performed a mission that no other aircraft in the world could have accomplished at the time. It cemented its legacy as the finest low-level, all-weather tactical strike aircraft of its era. On one long, perilous night, the Aardvark flew out of the shadow of its past and into the pages of aviation history. The F-111 had a rocky start before it could prove its performance. Let's go back more than 30 years before the jet's retirement. In the late 1950s, the U.S. Air Force's Tactical Air Command relied on the F-105 Thunder Chief for its primary strike role. When the Vietnam War escalated, the F-105 was the best aircraft TAC had, but the conflict brutally exposed its weaknesses. TAC commanders knew that technology was advancing rapidly, and even as the F-105 was entering service, they were already looking for its replacement. That replacement was envisioned as part of the TFX Tactical Fighter Experimental Project. It was meant to be a leap into the future, incorporating new materials, microcircuitry, and revolutionary engineering concepts. But the project soon took a dramatic turn with the arrival of a new Secretary of Defense in 1961, Robert McNamara. A former president of Ford Motor Company, McNamara brought a businessman's mindset to the Pentagon, determined to eliminate waste and bureaucratic overlap. He saw the separate and hugely expensive aircraft development programs of the Air Force and the Navy as a prime target for cuts. He insisted on a policy of commonality, demanding a single basic aircraft design that could be adapted to meet the very different needs of both services. This was a radical departure from tradition. The Air Force needed a low-level, long-range bomber. The Navy needed a high-altitude carrier-based fleet defense interceptor. Forcing these two opposing requirements into one airframe was an engineering challenge of epic proportions. After a fierce competition, the Pentagon narrowed the field to two designs. While both the Air Force and Navy favored a proposal from Boeing, McNamara chose the competing design from General Dynamics and its partner, Grumman. Why? Because it offered a much higher degree of shared parts between the two versions, fulfilling his mandate for commonality. In November 1962, the order was placed and the aircraft was officially designated the F-111. The F-111 was without a doubt the most technologically advanced aircraft of its time, packed with a stunning array of innovations. Its most iconic feature was the variable sweep wing. With wings fully forward, it could take off and land on shorter runways and fly efficiently at low speeds. Swept back into a delta shape, it could slice through the air at more than twice the speed of sound. The plane could literally reshape itself in flight to match the mission. It was the first production aircraft to use afterburning turbofan engines. The Pratt & Whitney TF-30 engines were remarkably fuel efficient for long-range cruising, but could unleash immense power with the afterburners for takeoff and combat. Combined with massive internal fuel storage, the F-111 could fly anywhere in the world with in-flight refueling. Perhaps its most crucial feature was the terrain-following radar. This system allowed the aircraft to fly automatically at hundreds of miles per hour while hugging the ground at altitudes as low as 200 feet day or night in any weather. It could stay hidden below enemy radar, making it an almost invisible phantom. Instead of traditional ejection seats, the F-111 featured a self-contained crew capsule. In an emergency, the entire cockpit section would be blasted clear of the fuselage by rockets. The capsule could then serve as a survival shelter on land or at sea. Despite the brilliant design, McNamara's one-size-fits-all dream quickly unraveled. The Navy's version, the F-111B, was plagued by weight problems. It was simply too heavy and unwieldy to operate safely from an aircraft carrier. After years of failed weight reduction programs, the Navy canceled its order in 1968 and instead developed the legendary F-14 Tomcat. The Air Force pressed on with its F-111A model, but this variant is also full of design flaws. One of the first and most serious setbacks hit the early F-111A variant in the form of structural fatigue. The gradual weakening of its metal and load-bearing structures caused by repeated stress over time, even when no single stress event was strong enough to cause immediate failure. For the F-111A, every mission meant cycles of bending, stretching, and compressing on the wing's fuselage and pivot joints. These forces created microscopic cracks that were invisible at first, but steadily grew with each flight. The constant lift forces, vibration pressure changes, and the strain of its variable sweep wing mechanism concentrated stress on the same vulnerable points. After dozens or hundreds of cycles, those tiny cracks could expand enough to cause catastrophic failure, sometimes under loads far lower than the aircraft's original design limits. The problem emerged earlier than expected for several reasons. The F-111A's variable sweep wing was a bold but untested concept with pivot joints and spars enduring complex shifting loads at multiple sweep angles, stresses far more intricate than those on a fixed-wing jet. Its mission profile demanded sustained high-speed, low-altitude flight, often Mach 0.9 to 1.2 just above the ground, generating intense vibration and rapid pressure shifts that accelerated the wear. And while its aluminum-titanium alloy was cutting edge for the late 1960s, engineers had limited experience with how it would hold up under the twisting and bending forces in such a mechanism, leading to cracks appearing much sooner than predicted. In 1968, eager to prove the aircraft's potential, they deployed a small detachment of 6 F-111s to Thailand for a combat evaluation program in Vietnam called Operation Combat Lancer. The results were disastrous. Within weeks, 3 of the 6 aircraft were lost. The press back home, already skeptical of the costly program, dubbed it the Flying Coffin. Though the losses were initially blamed on enemy fire, investigations later revealed a fatal flaw in the aircraft's tail stabilizer. Then in 1969, another F-111 crashed in the US when its wing pivot mechanism failed. The entire fleet was grounded. The F-111 program, once the Pentagon's crown jewel, was on the verge of cancellation. But the Air Force and General Dynamics refused to give up. They knew that beneath the teething problems lay a uniquely capable aircraft. They embarked on an intensive program to fix the structural flaws and improve the design. In 1972, the F-111 returned to Vietnam for Operation Linebacker II. This time, the results were stunningly different. Flying thousands of missions, often alone and at night, into the most heavily defended areas of North Vietnam, the F-111s proved nearly unstoppable. They suffered the lowest loss rate of any aircraft in the theater, silencing the critics and cementing their reputation. The ultimate compliment came from the Soviet Union, which later developed its own swing-wing bomber, the Su-24 Fencer, a design heavily inspired by the F-111. Over the years, the versatile airframe was continually upgraded. The EF-111 Raven was developed as a specialized electronic warfare platform capable of blinding enemy radar to create a safe corridor for other strike aircraft. Most importantly, the F-111F model was equipped with the PaveTac targeting pod. This system fitted in the bomb bay contained a laser and infrared camera, allowing the crew to identify targets from miles away and guide laser-guided bombs with surgical precision, the very technology that proved so devastatingly effective on that fateful night over Libya. So the story of the F-111 Aardvark is one of remarkable transformation. It began as a bold, almost arrogant vision, an attempt to force a single solution onto the wildly different needs of 2 military branches. This ambition led to a deeply troubled birth plagued by engineering nightmares, tragic losses, and a reputation as the Flying Coffin. For a time, it seemed the program was destined to become one of history's most expensive failures. But what followed was a testament to perseverance. Through meticulous redesigns and hard-won lessons, the F-111 was forged into something extraordinary. On the battlefields of Vietnam, it found redemption, proving its worth in the fiery skies over Hanoi. And in the audacious long-range raid on Libya, it reached the zenith of its capabilities, solidifying its legacy as the undisputed king of low-level, all-weather strike. The Aardvark's journey from a political punchline to a legendary warplane is a powerful reminder that true innovation often walks a fine line between genius and disaster. It proved that a radical idea, even one born from controversy, could ultimately change the face of aerial warfare. The F-111 is now a celebrated museum piece, but its influence lives on. Its retirement left a significant gap in capability, especially for deep strike missions. This leads us to a fascinating question for discussion. Australia was the last country to operate the F-111, retiring their fleet in 2010. They famously held a dump and burn ceremony, a spectacular fiery farewell that only the Aardvark could perform. What made the F-111 so beloved by the Royal Australian Air Force, and why did they hold on to it for so long after the US had moved on? Please leave a comment before watching a new video. Thanks for watching and see you in tomorrow's video.